Okay, I tried to record this video a couple of times. I realized that it's actually just not as deep of a thought as I thought it was. Um, and like I would need to spend more time uh, like fledging it out for it to be a like real meaningful um, belief that I hold. So I'm just gonna try to get through it and then see what comes up next. So the general idea is like passing through nihilism or passing um, like kind of not negating nihilism or existentialism, but like accepting elements of it and then having a more nuanced view of it. So generally speaking, I have in the past adopted the idea that like life has no inherent value. It's all cultural or personal or community driven, um, and that like really whatever uh, works for people, but there's nothing like guiding that, right? There's no force behind that. There's no like metaphysical truth or anything like that. Um, and that like maybe the best way to live life is to accept that there are like no correct or best ways to live life, no like truly meaningful ways to live life. Embrace that fully and live in spite of it. Um, However, I'm now kind of coming to the conclusion that I think a lot of that is correct, actually, but it's missing a crucial element, which I am now kind of thinking of as a convergence field, which is basically like people seemingly across cultures and across time have adopted similar principles in the pursuit of a path up to a better life or some like meaningful existence, right? Um, Things like community, um, and and like having a something that's fulfilling, like personally that you're personally invested in, that you engage with regularly. Um, I'm sure there's others that could come to mind. I haven't really put much thought into this, but I think that those things are really important, right? Because you don't generally see many people when they're trying to live a fulfilling, meaningful life going in truly the opposite direction of saying I'm gonna purposefully do nothing with my time and kill people and not talk to anyone ever, and that's gonna be really fulfilling to me. Um, like that's not a thing that occurs regularly. I mean, there's obviously always going to be outliers, right? But I don't think that's the norm, right? And I think having some idea of the norm, the trend of humanity when people are trying to live a fulfilling life or a meaningful existence, I think that's important. I think that's a an important like uh, uh, thought a useful modality of thought to kind of see the trends that other people have taken so that maybe you can try to emulate some of that, or maybe you just have something that's like bigger than yourself, even if it's just slightly bigger than yourself, and saying that like these are governing principles of how people tend to live, not even ought to live, or something like that. um, but I think the reason this has taken me so long to really come to is it's another idea that I've been playing with over the past like 3 years now, is this idea of like philosophical levels. And I'm sure there's formalized like real fully thought out language surrounding all of this, right? But this is just how I'm coming to it, I guess, of this like philosophical levels of like um and it comes up most when you're talking to people about philosophy of like if you can have a like ultimately skeptical claim about what the world is, that's like at the very bottom of saying like I look at everything and ultimately it could all be real. There could be an evil demon controlling my thought, and like none of this is real, and it's all a figment of imagination, and it's not even my imagination. It is just a substrate of the universe that's capable of having imagination, right? And that's like an ultimate skepticism. Um, and you, if you were just pulling that out in normal conversation of like, if someone didn't know what a word meant, And then you responded, well, actually, nothing is real, so the word means nothing, because I can't be sure that that word exists. Like that's meaningless and obtuse, purposefully obtuse, right? And like not helpful for anyone. So uh, this is where the idea of levels come in. Of like if our normal just day to day life is up here, then like there's a bunch of other governing elements that kind of govern how we end up at this point, how we influence how we end up at this point. Um, and you can have really meaningful conversations about each one of those levels. Um, but you should try not to transgress those barriers when you're having those conversations, I think. Uh, Maybe it's okay to transgress upwards. Like if you're having a conversation about what a meaningful life is, um, and that's like a level here, then I feel like it's reasonable to say, like, this is how my life is led, and here's my personal experience. But personal experience is weird, right? Sense is odd because that's kind of simultaneously at the top and at the bottom. Um, and I'm just naturally kind of thinking of this as a hierarchy. I'm not sure that that's the most accurate way of depicting it either. Um, I'm sure probably more like a brick wall of some sort where there's like one brick at the bottom and then two bricks on the side, and you can kind of more of a balancing act, like those rocks that are stacked on top of each other. But it's not necessarily always one rock stacked on top of the other rock. Um, but anyway, I think you should try not to transgress those boundaries when you're having those conversations. And I think that the pitfall that I fell into personally was when I was thinking about how to live a meaningful life, I um, really looked towards or looked for more metaphysical claims or um, yeah, I guess it's ultimately metaphysical claims, right? Because anything that I was looking for was more of a fundamental governing law of humanity, um, rather than like how humanity acts and how the general sensory experience of people comes to be, right? Um, and same thing goes with like ethics and stuff, right? Is that like there tends to be a general ethics that societies have tended towards. Um, and all of this gets pretty tricky, right? Because it's all heavily context dependent in the society that you're living in the history of human development. There's only been one history of human development, right? So it's ultimately going to be covered by that's history is the ultimate meta narrative in that way that like we have one um, experience of how history has progressed so far. So that is like really you can't look outside of that. It's so difficult to look outside of that. Even when you're looking at cultures of the past, it's influenced by like if you're here and other cultures are here, you have to go back through history to experience that old history, to look at that old history. So really like everything is simultaneously influential when you're trying to take any kind of broad perspective, broad viewpoint of these things. Um, and that gets in the way of a lot of things of ethics and how to live and truth and all those kind of things. They there's just so many influences that it's impossible to um, like really untie all of them or even to trace a single one back without being influenced by seven others, right? So uh, I guess what I'm trying to say is like it might be true, and I think I would still hold firm on this position that there's no like metaphysical meaning or reality or truth to existence. Um, but that's fine. That's whatever. That doesn't mean that there's not like a convergence field of how people do live and find meaning and happiness and fulfillment in in current human society, right? And if you look at it that way, then it's still pretty nebulous, right? It's still kind of um, non non-objective in that sense, but it is a little more grounded, I think. That you can at least say like I am also a person. I have experienced life in a roughly similar way than that people throughout time have, throughout our history have. Um, and you can kind of look for examples in that of, or general trends more than examples, I guess, is what I would advocate for. Um, and kind of see what tends to bring people values, what paths people have headed down in the past, and what has brought people fulfillment and engagement. And I think um, that's what I mean by passing through. Is it's a more of an additive element that removes some of the like objective, almost polemic elements um, of existentialism or absurdism or whatever, and kind of adds this extra um, depth to say, like, it doesn't matter at all actually if there is a higher meaning or a god or whatever. Um, it's okay just to live life like people do, and people tend to live life in a set of patterns, right? In a on like kind of only so many different paths, right? And people will people born now, even if they are like hardcore nihilists, will probably tend towards adopting those paths too, right? Um, but I think having some kind of boundary set is is useful to kind of stop yourself from feeling like you're floating out there in the middle of existence. To kind of say, like, there are maybe not not roads here, but there's at least, like, I can see the deer tracks through the woods, and like I know that there have been other creatures that have taken this trajectory before, um, and in that, I mean, I don't know. I could be entirely incorrect, and there could be a completely alternate way of living and an alternate conception of um, creating a new morality that is like instantly makes everyone a lot more fulfilled and um, gives everyone a complete sense of purpose, right? But that's a completely idealistic, ungrounded concept that is like not applicable to anyone's life right now, right? You have to be so far, um, you have to be just completely lost in the sauce at that point to come up with something like that. And if you're coming up with something like that in your lifetime, then you yourself are almost certainly not gonna live it. You're not gonna shift human morality, um, and that's okay, right? I think that's fine. I do think that there's room for experimentation, right? I think that that's an important element of all of this, right? Is that maybe there are trajectories, there's paths, there's a convergence field, but there is a lot gained when people kind of reject those previous paths and kind of wander towards something else, right? Just kind of wander in any given direction, really. Um, and I don't think that that's a bad thing, actually. I think that's like very helpful for humanity, or just like ideas in general. I love ideas. I think that's just helpful for more ideas to propagate. And so this has been completely rambly, but I think that another this is like the third time I've said this is the conclusion, but this is another conclusion that I'm drawing from this, is that if you're looking for a like fulfilling, meaningful life, then that is up here, and there's a bunch of paths that kind of trend towards that field, right? Um, and like this is where you're born or experience or whatever. I don't know where the start point is, um, but you can still be aware of that and kind of wander a different path, wander a different direction, right? And maybe you'll find something out there. Maybe you'll find a different convergence field, or maybe you will find a point. Maybe you will uh, like become schizophrenic and then actually find God and like be fully convinced that you have found God and achieved like eternal um, uh, enlightenment and eternal like joyous pleasure, right? And that's fine if you want to do that. That's cool, I guess. I don't know. Just like write it down in the book for write it down in a book for the rest of us, I guess, if you're going that direction. That would be cool. Um, but anyways, this has been complete ramblings. I've learned nothing from this, but I think there's probably 3 or 4 solid thoughts in all of this, that at some point I'll look back on and kind of draw further inference from. So yeah, good talk session. I will. I'm logging off now. I'm logging off. I'm logging